Hey everyone, it's Raphael from XX Raphael Productions, and I'm back with another Flash video, and today's topic is going to be a what-if scenario. So, to refresh your memory, basically, all the way back in Season 1, Episode 15, Barry accidentally time-traveled while trying to stop the weather wizard Mark Mardon. So, if you recall, Mark Mardon's tidal wave was going to hit Central City, and Barry had to try to stop it, but accidentally time traveled to the previous day. So this continues on to the very next episode where Barry basically stops Mardon from ever enacting his plans, and thus the rest of Season 1 and subsequent seasons takes place in a branched timeline. So this video essay will be talking about what if Barry never time traveled at that moment. So how much would things actually be different? Well, that's what we'll be talking about today. Alright, so let's go ahead and start with what we know, okay? So, this is a crucial moment, alright? This is where we'll focus on first, where Barry would successfully save the city after stopping Mark Mardon's tidal wave. So, in the original episode, Barry accidentally time travels here, and that is when this timeline ends, but let's assume that Barry never time travels, and then he would successfully save Central City from the incoming tidal wave, okay? So, coming from what we know from this episode, this would mean that Cisco is dead, so Eobard Thawne kills him after Cisco finds out the truth, and then this would mean that in Season 2 and onwards of this timeline, there will be no vibe in here, okay? So, no Cisco, that means no future vibe, alright? So that means that Team Flash is down with one member. And also, let's go ahead and talk about Caitlyn's fate while we're at it, because this is an interesting topic since back in the Jitters scene where Thawne kind of deduces that Caitlyn is obviously stalling him from whatever is happening at S.T.A.R Labs, with that being Cisco trying to learn the truth. Thawne does something interesting where he actually reveals his secret outright to Caitlyn in Jitters, and then, you know, that's the moment where everything goes south. But we haven't really questioned what happens to Caitlyn in this particular timeline. Well, I guess really it's common sense that if Thawne no longer cares about his identity, and if he even revealed it outright to Caitlyn, this tells me that Thawne has no intention of keeping her alive. So, after Caitlyn's phone call with Barry, where Barry is trying to ask Caitlyn on how to stop Mark Mardon's tsunami, let's assume that Thawne kills her off screen. So, this means that we're also down another Team Flash member, so there is no Killer Frost in the future of this timeline either. So, that means Vibe is gone, that means Cisco Vibe is out, and Caitlyn Killer Frost is out, so those two are gone. Alright, so Barry at this moment, though, he is unaware since obviously he is focused on keeping Iris calm after successfully stopping the tidal wave. And while we're at this topic again, let's talk about Iris, because her reaction to discovering Barry's identity will be very different, and let me explain why. In the timeline in the show where, you know, Iris discovers Barry's identity in episode, I believe it was episode 21, the Grodd episode, Iris is actually pissed at Barry because Barry kept on lying and lying, and she only really found out by catching him in the act. But in this timeline, episode 15, Barry actually outright reveals himself to Iris. So let's assume that since it was the other way around, where Barry actually told the truth, albeit was reluctant, but he still revealed it himself, Iris wouldn't be as angry, she'll just be overwhelmed and speechless of what she just saw. So she might be like, well, why didn't you tell me this earlier or whatever, but I don't think she'll be as mad as she was in the show's timeline, so I guess the Iris and Barry situation will be better here. Alright, so after this, Barry would calm Iris down, and he would obviously bring Iris somewhere safe. So that means he would probably transport her either to S.T.A.R Labs or Joe's house again. So now we'll talk about Joe later when we get into Mark Mardon's fate in this timeline. But yeah, basically Barry would calm Iris down, and then let's go ahead and talk about what Thawne would be doing, because after Thawne kills Cisco, we never really see him afterwards until Barry resets the timeline. So let's go ahead and speculate what Thawne will do while Barry is still out of S.T.A.R Labs, okay? So, in my theory, I'm going to assume that Wells is staging S.T.A.R Labs, like he's going to alter the evidence and make it look like the man in yellow just sped in and murdered Cisco and Caitlyn, but just like how in episode 9 where Thawne injured himself with the speed mirage, I think Wells will injure himself in the meantime. And like, he'll probably beat himself to near death so that it doesn't look suspicious. Because, you know, if Barry returns eventually, he'll obviously want to know what the heck happened to Cisco and Caitlin, and also he might question why Wells is still alive. So Wells would probably beat himself to near death to the point that he needs extensive care and support. So Barry would probably be not as suspicious, okay? So basically the cortex will be destroyed. Presumably the cameras will be destroyed as well, because there won't be any evidence that... Because Thawne basically just killed Cisco like right there, so obviously Thawne would want to erase any evidence catching him in the act until now. And then the only reason why Thawne would go through this effort is because he needs to keep his secret from Barry, okay? Like, he doesn't care about revealing his secret to to Cisco or Caitlin, but Thawne would obviously need Barry alive to complete his plans. So, because if you remember in the season 1's final episode, Barry is needed to create the wormhole. He needs to collide with that particle in that particle accelerator to create the wormhole. So Barry is basically safe here. Thawne has no reason to kill Barry, so he will basically lie or destroy any evidence to make it look like he's innocent. So to Barry's perspective, it will look like the Reverse Flash sped in, injured Wells, and killed the rest, alright? So Barry is safe, but unfortunately, Cisco and Caitlin are gone in this timeline. Alright, so let's move on to section 2 now. So this is going to talk about the fates of Mark Mardon, aka the Weather Wizard, and also the guy who summoned the tidal wave to begin with, alright? So this might be a bit unexpected, but I actually don't think, in my opinion, I don't think Mark Mardon will last any longer. Like, he won't be a threat in this timeline at all. And let me explain why. Because he doomed himself when he tried to destroy the entire city. Now, the reason for this is because if we're going to talk about Thawne's goals, he needs S.T.A.R Labs because of the particle accelerator to create the wormhole that Barry has to hit. Now, Thawne needs S.T.A.R Labs operational, and therefore the city has to be operational as well, because if Mark Mardon succeeded in destroying the city, that means that S.T.A.R Labs would be affected by this, and this could potentially threaten Thawne's 15-year plan, okay? So not only does Barry have a vendetta against Mardon, but Thawne especially has one as well, because basically Mardon has made 2 enemies by doing this. So the only way Mardon is safe is if he really jumps to a new city and never returns. And as for Joe West, because you know Mardon abducted Joe West like prior to summoning the tsunami, I don't think he'll kill Joe at all, because he wants Joe to suffer, so he'll probably just like leave another. He'll probably injure Joe further, you know, like Joe has a broken leg, as you can see in the picture here, so he might just injure him further, but I don't think he'll kill Joe. So, like I said before, Mardon's situation, I do think that Mardon would be disposed of pretty quickly, and here are some ways I think that can happen. So, from Thawne's case, he might go ahead and walk to, you know, the time vault, and he might go ahead and ask Gideon to track down Mark Mardon by using some techno-babble that I'm sure the writers can come up with. And then he would locate the area of Mardon, and then he would speed over to Mardon himself personally and shove his vibrating hand through his chest, therefore ending him. Because like, there is no way Thawne would ignore this, especially after this tidal wave being a grave threat to his plans. I do think Thawne would eliminate that threat instantly, just like how we saw in episode 16, where he eliminated Mason Bridge after Bridge was writing the newspaper, potentially exposing Thawne's connection to Simon Stagg's death, okay? So, Mardon would either be dead from Thawne, or Barry would speed back to S.T.A.R Labs, and, you know, like I said before, even if Barry goes to S.T.A.R Labs now, Thawne would have probably successfully, like, staged S.T.A.R Labs to look like a crime scene where the Reverse Flash injured himself and killed the other 2, so Barry would have no reason to suspect Wells if Thawne does a good job faking the evidence. So I guess another way to capture Mark Mardon, Barry, with the help of Thawne, would use the Cortex's like technology. Like, I know that I said earlier Thawne would destroy the Cortex, but he would only destroy like the security cameras or make it ransacked. I don't think he would destroy the actual computers themselves. So Barry would still use the computers, and in an act of rage, he would probably, go and capture Mark Mardon himself, just like in the alternate timeline. So either way, Mark Mardon is finished unless he jumps to a whole new city and never returns. That's the only way I can see Mardon being safe. Other than that, he would probably be captured easily. Alright, so in this section, we're going to talk about what happens when Barry finally returns to S.T.A.R Labs, okay? So, after bringing Iris somewhere safe and sound, Barry would speed over to S.T.A.R Labs, still unaware of Wells' betrayal, and he would see the horrendous sight of the Cortex being ransacked and destroyed, along with Caitlin and Cisco's dead bodies. And then you can also see that Dr. Wells is injured, self-inflicted, just like from episode 9, he would injure himself, and basically Thawne is barely alive from his injuries, and he would ask Barry for help, while I guess you could say that Thawne is limp and he cannot even move. So Barry would probably call in Firestorm much earlier, because look, like I said before in the first section, Team Flash would be reduced like drastically since you have lost Cisco and Caitlin. It would only be Barry and Thawne left for Team Flash, so I'm assuming Firestorm will come in much earlier, because like the only time they called Firestorm in was around episode 22, which is Rogue Air, to fight Reverse Flash along with Arrow, but with most of Team Flash being dead, Barry would call in assistance much earlier. So, in both timelines again, Thawne will not kill Barry, since Barry is absolutely important for Thawne's goal to return to his future timeline. So, Barry would be safe here, and only Cisco and Caitlin are doomed, and Barry will not suspect Wells for a couple extra episodes. So Thawne continues to lie to Barry. He would say something like, the man in yellow sped into S.T.A.R Labs unexpectedly, killed them both and nearly killed me, while acting like he's being distraught, to which Barry would believe Thawne initially about this. And remember Barry only really suspects Thawne after Mason Bridges' death, and when Thawne teaches Barry how to phase. So the phasing episode was episode 17, while this episode is 15. So at this point in time, Barry has no reason yet to suspect Wells is actually evil, okay? So Thawne would nurse himself back to health, and I'm assuming Barry would cry over the loss of his teammates, and this would actually have some potential ramifications for Barry's strength. Now, if you recall in Season 2, Episode 23, I know that's like a season later, but let's use this very same example where Zoom kills Barry's dad, Henry Allen, and then you can clearly see that Barry is a much more capable and stronger fighter when fighting Zoom. So it's clear to me that if Barry loses someone he loves, he gets a lot stronger in fighting, and he actually, like I said before, if you compare the way Barry fought in the Season 2 finale compared to his usual, you can see Barry employing a lot of cool techniques because the rage is helping him out. So this would actually make Thawne satisfied, since Thawne's plan throughout Season 1 is to also make Barry faster in order for Barry to be able to collide at the necessary speed in that particle accelerator, right? So this would satisfy Thawne, as Barry would push himself to train even harder after telling himself that he wasn't fast enough to protect his teammates. So I can see that as a rationale for Barry to get even faster than he did. So that's definitely going to be very interesting to see that version of Barry. So yeah, that is basically an unintended side effect from Thawne killing Cisco and Caitlin, alright? So now let's go ahead and also talk about Joe. Like I said before, I promised that I would talk about Joe in this timeline. So Thawne helps Barry track down Joe with some mumbo-jumbo science. Like I said before, the show writers can make up some random techno-babble. And then Barry would speed over to wherever Mardon was holding him hostage, and assuming that Mardon would either be there, Barry would either capture Mardon first and then come back for Joe, and then I guess he would go to Joe, but then he would see the injuries that Joe sustained. So I'm assuming that there will be some extra help to get Joe back to S.T.A.R Labs. And unfortunately, Joe would probably have to use crutches for a while, or Joe West would have to use a wheelchair, which is ironic, but yeah, I guess that's how things would go during the S.T.A.R Labs section. So now, let's go ahead and move on to the next section. So let's move on to Thawne's identity being revealed to Team Flash at last, alright? So in this version of Team Flash, we have Firestorm already here because of, Team Flash being reduced to a small number of people. And I honestly think that Firestorm as well will probably be enraged because, Caitlyn, right, is Ronnie's fiance, and then him finding out that she's been dead from Reverse Flash, for example. Now, obviously, Firestorm doesn't know yet that Wells is Reverse Flash, but this will come into play later during the fight in the next couple sections, okay? So, I guess episode 16 will not happen because, like I said before, Captain Cold returned, but that was basically a ramification of changing the timeline. So, instead of Mardon, it was Captain Cold and Heatwave and then Golden Glider, but like I said before, I think that in this timeline it would go straight to the Tricksters episode, or I guess Captain Cold will just be robbing some other area, and then while Team Flash is focusing on the Trickster at this moment. So things will go mostly the same, I guess. Iris is still will probably be like, in the area where the Trickster was, where Barry injects all of them with a cure, and then Trickster captures Henry Allen. You know what I'm talking about. The episode will play out the same. Then this is the moment where Barry will suspect Thawne again, is when Thawne will teach Barry how to phase, alright? So, if you remember at that episode 17, this actually jumpstarts Barry's initial suspicions. Now, I know that you might be wondering, well, didn't he already suspect it after Mason Bridge is killed? Well, it is unknown whether Mason Bridge is killed in this timeline because, like I said before, Barry altered that timeline, so that was the outcome, but it's unknown if Bridge is still alive here. So I'm gonna go ahead and assume that for this particular moment, it is the time when Thawne teaches Barry how to phase. That is the time that Barry's suspicions against Wells is jump-started, alright? So basically then things will play out mostly the same way, but let's go ahead and talk about how they would discover the real Dr. Wells' body. So I think that it will be much harder because Cisco is the one who built the device to track, the tachyon or whatever technobabble they were talking about. But since there's no Cisco, I guess it will take a long time for them to find Wells' body. Or maybe they may not even find the body at all. They'll just probably assume that the Wells' face is Thawne's real face. They'll assume. That's assuming that they don't find the body. But if they do find it eventually, it will be a lot longer and probably will take like an extra day or so to find it. It's like they don't really have like ample like opportunities to look around because like they only were able to pinpoint the location of the body from Cisco's device, and since Cisco's dead, I'm not sure they'll be able to invent that, alright? So yeah. Now the season 1 finale would consist of Barry, Joe, Iris, Ronnie, and Stein, alright? So let's go ahead and talk about the season 1 finale now. So let's move on to the next section. Okay, so this final section will cover how season 1 would close, alright? So it is very possible in this timeline that when it comes to the, the Flash, Arrow, and Firestorm fight, where they kind of take down Reverse Flash, I do think that Firestorm will try to kill Thawne instead of I'm sure that their original intention is to simply capture Thawne and put him in the pipeline, because if they really wanted to kill him, then Arrow would shoot Thawne in the head or some other fatal point, but instead he simply shot Thawne in the leg to, deactivate his speed with the nanites from Ray Palmer. But yeah, since half of Team Flash is gone, Firestorm is angry that Caitlyn is dead, I do think that they will try to kill, Thawne, but I do think Barry will eventually try to stop them because, they need Thawne to confess. This is something that I want to talk about. Barry will probably still have the idea to get Thawne to confess to killing Nora Allen to get his dad out of jail. So even if Firestorm will try to kill him, I do think Barry will try to stop him, and then that will probably lead to a heated disagreement between the two, but eventually things will pan out mostly the same way. Thawne will be captured and then, placed in the pipeline. So this moves on to the season 1's final episode, where it is very possible that in this particular timeline, Barry's actually a lot stronger since he's enraged by the death of his fellow teammates. Now, imagine this. Barry is frustrated, he is mourning, and then he finds out that his mentor is the enemy. Yeah, you just pissed Barry off basically when this happens. So I do think that when it comes to the final fight, let's say Barry, time travels and sees dying mother, and then he time travels back and stops Thawne from returning home. I do think that it is very possible that Barry could actually beat Season 1 Thawne himself by, I do think that Barry could potentially beat him up with his own power. Now, this will be a stark contrast to the actual Season 1 finale, where Reverse Flash beat Barry pretty easily, but like I said before, remember in the Season 2 finale, Barry was able to easily, well, not, I wouldn't say easily, but he swiftly defeated Zoom twice in that episode after being enraged by the death of his father. So this fight will be very interesting to witness in this version of events. So I do think that Barry going onto Season 2 will definitely be a lot stronger than the actual Season 2 premiere, alright? Now, as for the wormhole, whether it still happens, I do think that Eddie Thawne will still kill himself, so, because you know what I'm saying, I don't see why anything will change in regards to Eddie's, motives. I'm sure Eddie would kill himself to, stop Reverse Flash. The wormhole will open up as a result of it being unstable. Barry would go ahead and try to stop the black hole in Central City, and then Firestorm would probably sacrifice himself again, and the rest of Season 2 would continue, and I guess we'll talk about the Zoom saga in this altered version, but that'll be saved for a different video, okay? So, now, for the verdict, this timeline will not be happy, period. It'll be a whole lot different, because in the future seasons, vibe has been very important in many scenarios where they had to rely on his powers to get themselves out of dire situations. So, it'll be very interesting to see how Team Flash, or what's left of Team Flash, will cope with these future enemies without Cisco and without Caitlin, alright? So, yeah, not a happy ending for this timeline, so I guess it's a good thing that Barry time traveled in that crucial moment in the tidal wave. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and if you guys think something else could also potentially happen, feel free to comment that down below, and I will go ahead and get ahead to reading them. So, Raphael out, and I will see you soon.